The 16th Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity is welcoming all of you who participated this event. Now we will begin increasing distributed generation to achieve carbon neutrality session. And let me introduce the chairperson of the session. Professor Ho-min Kim is a professor of Jeju National University in the Department of Electrical Engineering and the chairperson of the Jeju Special Self-Governing Province Energy Committee. Now I will hand over the microphone to the chairman, Kim Ho-min. Good morning, everyone. I am the chairperson of this session, Kim Ho-min, the chairperson of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province Energy Committee. Net zero carbon is on the way to becoming global buzzword on the year. Jeju is in front runner in achieving carbon neutrality, having adopted its carbon-free island 2030 policy since 2012. As a result, renewables now account for 16% of Jeju's total energy generation. This puts Jeju in phase 3 of IEA's categorization of RE integration alongside the leading countries in renewable energy. As the shares of renewable and distributed generation increase, Jeju is beginning to face challenges such as curtailment and the imbalance between alternative and existing energy system. This session was designed based on the idea that these problems are not only limited to Jeju but also affect the whole country and beyond. Let me introduce today's speakers and panelists. First, we have Johanna Boyer. Johanna Boyer is working as the senior strategist, and she is expert in microgrid and distribution tax. And the next speaker is Gachon University Hong Jun-hee, and he has been working for 20 years as an expert in energy technologies such as smart grid, electric vehicles, energy storage, solar power, digital power, etc., and as energy expert on green growth. Now, let me introduce today's panelist. The first panelist is Lee Woo-hyun, Director General for Energy Innovation Policy at Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. Director Lee was served as Director for Gas Division and General Services and Personnel Division as well as Director General for Trade Policy. He is currently playing an important role on policy design and design to achieve carbon neutrality. The second panelist, Younghee Won, is a member of National Assembly of the Republic of Korea. She was Secretary General of the Energy Conversion Forum and has long served as head of Energy and Climate Team and Environmental Movement. The third panelist is Cho Gang-uk, the Executive Director of Korea Power Exchange. He also served as a Korean representative for CIGRESC2. He was involved in power system planning and operation more than 30 years when he worked for Korea Electric Power Corporation and Korea Power Exchange. The fourth panelist is Kim Joo-jin, CEO of Climate Solutions. CEO Kim Joo-jin is a legal expert and active in energy and environmental field for a long time and is actively working as an expert in domestic climate change and energy policy, including participating as a member of Third Basic Energy Plan Work Group. The last panelist, Yoon Hyung-seok, is Director of the Future Strategy Bureau of Jeju Special Governing Province. He had served as a policy researcher for the Jeju Special Self-Governing Provincial Council and is focusing on design and execution for the future growth and sustainable development. So let's start the session now. First, let's hear from Johanna Boyer about the lessons she learned from operating a power system with renewable energy, such as wind and solar power in South Australia. Ms. Boyer, please start.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me today. Today, I'll be presenting on a case study from Australia, and we'll be looking at South Australia, which shows that a grid dominated by wind and solar is possible. I work at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis and analysing the whole of Australia's electricity network. So where is the world currently at in terms of wind and solar as a share of electricity production? Well, some of the G20 leaders are Germany with 33%, United Kingdom with 28%, the EU 27 with 19%, Australia has 17% wind and solar, and South Australia, which is one of the states in Australia, has 60% wind and solar in the electricity grid. So to put this in context, South Australia is this state shown in purple, and it is at the edge of Australia's national electricity market. So Australia's national electricity market connects all of the East Coast grids of Australia, and because it's at the edge of the grid, it does face substantial challenges with managing voltage, frequency, and inertia. So we can learn a lot of lessons from South Australia because it is in this unique position where it has a large amount of wind and solar in the grid, and it's also at the edge of a national electricity market network. So the first lesson is that 60% annual variable renewables is possible. So South Australia went from having virtually 0% wind and solar in the grid in 2006 to having 60% wind and solar in the grid in 2020. So where was the electricity coming from? There was 13% rooftop solar, 4% utility scale solar, 42% wind, and the remainder was made up with gas of 42%, imports and exports from Victoria, which is the neighbouring state, and there was also minor contributions from batteries. So in South Australia, because wind and solar is the cheapest form of generation, that is usually being used, and then gas comes in the evenings to make up when there's not enough wind and solar. And anything left that needs to be balanced is made up with imports and exports and batteries. The South Australian example also shows that 100% solar is possible in certain time periods. So in October 2020, there was an hour in the middle of the day when, on the 11th of October, when 100% of the demand was met by solar. So that include rooftop solar and utility scale solar. So this is the first for any major jurisdiction in the world, and there were no operational issues associated with the milestone of 100% solar. So how did South Australia get to this high penetration wind and solar situation? Well, the initial adoption of renewables was driven by market features and government action. So South Australia has strong wind and solar resource. It also had historically high residential and wholesale electricity prices that made renewables very competitive, and it has an open access network connection regime, which makes it easier for new entrants to connect to the transmission grid. And government action also drove the uptake of renewables. So South Australia was the first jurisdiction in Australia to have a subsidised net feed-in tariff for rooftop solar exports. And the federal renewable energy target was brought in 2009, and that aims to get 20% of generation from renewables by 2020. And it provided financial certificates to renewable energy projects, which gave them a substantial additional revenue stream and made it much easier for those new renewable projects to get up and running. Coal generation was phased out in South Australia in 2016. It became increasingly unprofitable because wind was really growing in the state. And so the coal generators were only running for some part of the year and eventually were phased out completely. And the final coal generator did offer to keep running for a $24 million payment, but the state government refused and closed the generator, and then renewables continued to grow in the state from then. The South Australian example also shows that ambitious plans to go beyond 100% renewables can help drive jobs and growth. So the South Australian government has an aim to reach net 100% renewables by 2030, but it's tracking to reach that aim much earlier. It will likely reach net 100% renewables by 2025. And this is because the transition is happening much faster than anyone expected. And the South Australian government actually aims to go beyond 100% renewables. They want to have renewable energy levels at 500% of South Australia grid demand by 2050. What does it mean, 500%? Well, they want to become a national and international exporter of renewable energy, green hydrogen, and other low emissions products. How are they going to do that? Well, they will build more transmission with other neighbouring states. They also have state government mechanisms to support decarbonisation initiatives like electric vehicles, batteries, renewable energy. They also have put money behind it, and this is driving jobs and growth in the state already. So international battery manufacturers Sonnen and Alpha ESS established local manufacturing facilities in South Australia, and this plan to go 100% and beyond is expected to drive jobs and growth in the state. So another lesson that we learned from South Australia is that wind and solar bring down the electricity prices. So as I mentioned, wind and solar are the cheapest form of generation in the national electricity market. And that's really resulting in reduced prices in the recent years. So South Australia's wholesale electricity prices are shown in yellow in this chart. And from 2017 to 2021 year to date, South Australia wholesale prices dropped by 65% and the national electricity market prices dropped by 60%. So we're really seeing dramatic reductions in wholesale prices driven by increasing amounts of low-cost renewables coming into the system. And how does this look on a daily profile level? Well, wind and solar are creating these negative price events, which are becoming more frequent with high renewable. So Q1 of 2021 prices are shown in yellow in this chart. And you can see the average price in Q1 2021 from 10 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. was actually negative $12 per megawatt hour. And so this is driven by the low cost renewables, which are bidding into the market at zero or even negative prices because they also have additional revenue coming from their certificates. And there's also a lot of supply in the grid driven by rooftop solar as well. So we're seeing prices actually go into negative territory in the middle of the day as all the generators are competing with one another to stay online. The South Australian example also shows that reliability can be maintained in a grid that's dominated by wind and solar. So Australia has very high reliability standard of 99.998%. And this has been met every year for the past 15 years or so, except for 2008, 2009, when there was an extreme heat event. But apart from that, the rest of the years we've had very high reliability, even in a high renewables penetration situation. There are explorations being made at the moment in terms of how to manage grid security with increasing amounts of renewables. So in South Australia, demand is going so low in some periods of the day because there's so much rooftop solar that the grid security is having to be managed in different ways. And so they've established 4 synchronous condensers. They're also improving the interconnection with New South Wales so that South Australia can export to New South Wales and not just Victoria. And they're also obtaining frequency reserves from renewables and large-scale batteries and looking into regulatory solutions and reform options to manage security. And they want to design a grid that is going to be more resilient in the future, given that we have increasing amounts of distributed generation and renewable energy, and the system is becoming more complex and So one thing that's being introduced is managing the grid on a 5-minute level and having 5-minute wholesale spot market settlement instead of 30 minutes. But there's a lot of other mechanisms and regulatory changes like this that are being introduced to manage grid security in South Australia and in Australia as a whole. Batteries have been introduced and they're playing a major role in maintaining the grid security in South Australia. So South Australia has 4 utility scale batteries. One of them is the Hornsdale battery, which is 150 megawatts, and it's co-located with a wind farm. It provides frequency services, it trades in the wholesale energy market, it prevents the interconnector with a neighbouring state from tripping, provides backup reliability measure and inertia, and it saved consumers $150 million in the first 2 years of operation. So it's been a financial and technical success, and South Australia is planning to get more and more batteries to help manage grid security. The South Australia example also shows that transmission needs to be planned to accommodate renewables. So the increasing amounts of renewables is stretching the capacity and reach of Australia's transmission network, because renewables are being installed in places where we didn't have existing transmission capacity in the past. So we're having to upgrade transmission in those areas. Additional transmission capacity is planned to connect neighbouring states so that they can enhance energy supply demand balancing, and also to connect renewable energy zones where there's a large amount of wind and solar to the load centres. But current issues that are seen in the transmission network are things like grid connection delays due to high regulatory process burden, transmission losses are high in certain areas, and curtailment is also an issue for wind and solar farms, which is due to system strength, inertia, congestion, and other network constraints. And that's a key issue for wind in South Australia and for solar in Victoria and New South Wales, because many solar farms have been installed close to one another in areas that don't have the transmission capacity to support all of those. Another lesson we can learn from South Australia is that the high penetration of rooftop solar can be managed by doing innovation in the distribution network. So there were some fears initially that the high amounts of rooftop solar with energy being exported into the network would actually lead to voltage rise in the network. And there was a lot of worry around this. However, agencies have looked into this issue and they found that there was already pre-existing issues with voltage in the distribution network. The voltage is supposed to be 230 volts, but it was sitting at an average of 245 to 250 volts. And so having extra solar fed in was then increasing the voltage even more, but there was already an existing major issue with voltage. So the distribution network service providers in Australia are learning how to manage voltage in the network, and also learning that it's not just due to the voltage issues are not due to solar PV, it's mainly due to pre-existing issues in the distribution networks. So they're managing rooftop solar in the distribution networks through a range of different mechanisms. A lot of new technical standards are being brought in, which are vital for investor confidence and making sure that distributed energy can really be rolled out with security and in a cost-effective way. They're also installing smart meters and voltage monitoring throughout the network. However, we do need a lot more of that. And dynamic operating envelopes is an innovation that some areas in Australia are looking into, and that is having a dynamic import or export amount that is based on how much capacity the distribution network has. So you can either turn up the PV system or turn it down based on the capacity in the distribution network. And that is an innovation worth imitating, because that will likely provide a more efficient way of integrating solar and making sure that the voltage and whatnot is managed. And managing rooftop solar has only needed 1% of regulated network revenue, even though South Australia has 40% of homes with rooftop solar. So it hasn't proved to be very expensive to manage rooftop solar, and it's proved to be a very popular very strong option for South Australian consumers. So thank you. I've been looking more and more into the South Australia case study, and there'll be more insights available as the South Australia transition progresses to 100%, 500%, and beyond. You can read our report on the IEPA website and written by myself and Gabrielle Piper. So thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. We just had a presentation at the case study of the current status of the renewable energy in the South Australia, as well as the related policies. While hearing the presentation, we could see a lot of similarities of the electricity and the power network that we have in Jeju. So in South Australia, they are now distributing and supplying the renewable energy of the up to 60% of the total power. So in the evening time, then they can utilize gas to compensate the loss of the solar power. However, but they can guarantee the 100% power supply only with the renewable energy. So that was the key point and interesting point from her presentation. So South Australia could have this network because of their natural resources. They have rich renewable sources, including solar and wind. And also they had a very strong government actions and also the willingness and the commitment to reduce the use of coal fuel. In particular, the South Australia government has a target to increase the supply power until 2050, and they will expand the trade with other states as well. So ultimately, their target is to link the renewable energy power to the employment and the growth of the economy. And currently, they could achieve the reduction of the electricity power by 60 up to 65%, especially based on the rooftop solar power. So they could see a lot of positive effects. So the network of the renewable energy, the biggest hurdle was the security management of the network, and she gave a very elaborated explanation on that issue as well. So including synchronous condenser and the network with other states. So we could see how they solved the issue. And they also made great effort to secure this great management of the security. So, and ultimately for us, we have to manage and operate this renewable energy well in the grid network. And for that, she advised that we can do so by securing this technology standard. So thank you again for the great presentation. Next, Professor Hong Jun-hee from Gachon University will give us presentation about policy implementation plan for energy conversion to realize carbon neutrality.
예, 자료
The presentation from Dr. Joanna Boyer was very practically relieving. 500% of renewable energy target. No more using energy, no more saving energy. We use a surplus energy, and that is the policy of the government that are in preparation. Making 100% energy supply from solar energy and making carbon energy to 0%. And lastly, most renewable energy concern people are worried about cost. You pointed out that we can reduce cost by 50%, and this is very relieving. I will start my presentation. I have different material now, but I will start it right away. Okay, I will start. As an engineer, I will going to tell you something that is not my field. Basically, energy transition is very clear thing. We combine carbon and oxygen, and this is the carbon energy system. This is the basic equation. If you look at this equation, we cannot avoid the CO2 generation, and we can see that it is also generating heat. So carbon energy is very close to heat and very close to steam turbine. Our humanity is facing energy transition in order to resolve climate change, and this is another equation, E equals mc squared. This is the equation that I want to talk about. Currently, this is the only alternative that was discovered by science. You have to use m, mass, and speed to get the energy. This is making us free from depletion and free from climate impact. And I want to say this a technology of mass energy. One is reactor method, and the other is, like Dr. Boyer pointed out, is photovoltaic system. Utilizing reactor from the nature, which is the sun, this can be the source of the energy. This is very good for us because it is not making CO2, and this is not making any steam, so this is directly producing energy. So we have to know the implication of this equation. Then I want to suggest the energy system with photovoltaic, and this will be the solar energy system. And there can be some questions here. Will there be enough solar energy? If you look at the yellow circle, this is very well-known picture. This blue dot is an annual energy consumption amount, but sun is giving us 1,438 to us. This is renewable. We don't have to worry about depletion here. And if we have wind power, biomass, yes, they can be used also, but the amount is so small, so that won't be the resolution for us. And there's uranium also, but the time period is very short, so it will disappear after a few decades. So solar energy is very unique, and this is the only energy source that can maintain the surplus status. So we need to think about the solar energy. What does this mean to us? I can think of 4 things here. One is energy insufficiency. This can be changed to energy surplus civilization. This is the only enabler that will transit us to this civilization. I want to emphasize the surplus. Secondly, the marginal cost here is 0, very close to 0. Third, very high quality because it is getting electricity directly. This is compact, high speed, and high density. This is enabling us to have this process. So if you look at these characteristics, solar energy system is the version for our future civilization. So if you sum up, our civilization will change from deficit to surplus. We have discovered this because we are facing crisis. We have discovered this because we were facing crisis. The good thing about solar system, solar power, is you are looking at the decline chart. This is levelized cost of electricity, and I think, like most experts expect, the cost of electricity will go down. And if you want to build 100% solar power system, the hardware cost will only take up about 20%. So if you want to increase the capacity of the solar power system 100%, that doesn't mean the cost will also increase 100%. It will only cost 20% more. So if you look at the right side, if you look at the red line, the only additional cost will be 20% or 30%. If you think about the operation and if you think about the profit, this nature is very important to us. So this is the point where I cannot understand the solar power operators only wants to make their facility 100%, not more. So this is the condition of solar power system not pulling out 100% of its capacity. So if you are equipped with 200% of capacity, then this means that you will lose only about 500 hours per year. So the rest, 7,000 hours, even though the 7,000 hour will not get the sufficient output, but so if you look at yearly, if you oversize 30%, then this will give you 28% of more revenue, and this means 30% more investment will give you 150% more revenue. And if I'm not wrong, I think we should have oversized facility. We should maintain the surplus condition. So if you don't sell the rest, you just have to throw it away. That's okay. And don't interpret this as the strategy for the operator. Think of this as the civilization. think of this as the measure of the new civilization. If you look at this technology, what will improve? Let's take example of a smart grid. Smart grid is about reducing cost of supply with the help of consumer. So supplying energy when when consumer wants. This is a very smart idea. But it doesn't look smart to me. This concept doesn't look smart to me. According to my strategy, why do you insist just in time supply system? Why don't you just have a capacity of 200% or 300%? You can produce more and you can give that production to consumers. I know that smart grid is very astonishing, but I think 200% capacity is more astonishing. So if you think about renewable energy policy or neutral energy policy, it is all about building capacity of 300%. So you can lower the complexity in that process, and you can lower the cost in that process, and that will also get rid of numerous issues. And 200% surplus will be focused on electrifying the energy from coal. And this is the energy strategy. And with this, we can have numerous strategies implemented. And the first stage is fixing the market structure because it has margin cost close to zero. So cost-oriented or cost-based market system, bidding market system, will not work anymore because operators will keep participating in the bidding process. So I think the direction will be focusing on the bidding. One is about giving the power whenever the consumer wants. The cost will be a little bit more expensive than before, and I'm okay with 30 minutes of blackout, but for consumers' perspective, they can have another energy bill plan. So only with the half of capacity, they can manage to use electricity. So the cost will be decreased about 60%. Why is that? It's because the rest of the energy is the surplus energy. And third, with the surplus energy, you can use this to steam or heating facility, or maybe you can make Bitcoin green. You can make carbon-free Bitcoin, or you can make diamonds with this energy. I heard the Samsung Electronics have the similar technology. E equals mc square. But if you look at this in different way, with mc square, you can make energy. You can improve the capability of a material, or you can grow artificial meat, or you can grow vegetables. Maybe we can design a civilization that we have never seen before. Maybe that can be used to the economy that we have never seen before. This is only the half of my presentation, new presentation file, but since I don't have enough time, I will sum up. We need to go 2 steps further, not just 1 step. That means we need to have 300% of energy capacity. With the surplus energy, we can lower the complexity, we can lower the customer's cost, and based on this foundation, we can find a new way for evolution, and this can be the good starting point. So carbon neutrality will not be controversial anymore. It will avoid technical difficulties, and we can get there easier than we thought. Thank you very much. Since you have summarized very well, I will say one more time. We can use solar energy as the infinite energy so that we can get the surplus amount, and if we get the energy in a very economic way, then we can get to the direction that we want. There was some suggestion related to that. Next, we will have.
So next we're gonna have a short discussion. And after the discussion, we're gonna have a Q&A session. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. For our online audience, please leave your question at the links on the YouTube. So first, we'd like to hear comments from the Whoyoung League, Director General for Energy Innovation Policy and Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Director General for Energy Innovation Policy and Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. Professor Hong just mentioned about the era of the energy surplus. And I think it is a role how to make institutionalize all the energy ideas and how we can make the practical approaches related with that. So I'd like to talk about a related issue in the policy that we have, and this presentation will be when I was here in Jeju first time in 2014. My work was to establish AOL power plants because Jeju was struggling with the lack of energy. So we needed to build this facility and bring a new required energy to the island. But within less than 10 years, we are now approaching to the era of energy surplus. So practically the power capacity produced in Jeju is more than 2,000 megawatts. So for wind power, for solar power, we have 448 megawatts. And for wind power, we are producing 295 megawatts. So it is about 400 to meet the minimum or the lowest demand. So when we are entering the period of the lowest demand, our energies are actually surplus. So we need to think about how we can utilize the energy surplus with the policies. So I'd like to briefly introduce a distributed energy activation plan. So for the distributed energy, we had a thought about the investment and the burdens for the opening and network, and also the methods how to make it effective. So it's about 3, 4 to 5 kilovolt. So those energy could be produced locally. So we call this distributed energy. Well, actually, there's a legal definition, but we call it the energy source by producing 3 to 5 kilovolt in a local area. So we can include renewable energy in the other sectors. And of course, the group energy business or the local energy business, we are trying to match the production and the consumption in the local area up to 500 megawatts. So the energy power and the electricity power required for the local can be produced in the region. So by doing so, we can reduce the burden of the energy network. So to do so, we can reduce the burdens of the cost for establishment of opening and the transmission network. And also because they are like fossil-free fuels, we can meet the goals of the net zero policy. And also for the energy distribution and supply plan, we have a plan and made an announcement we will expand the use of the distributed energy. So if we can call the current energy system as a centralized, we can democratize the energy system in the future. So it will be decentralized energy system. So from the large-scale power plant-based centralized power generation system, it will become the distributed power generation system centered on small power plants. So before, we were focusing on the economy of scale of economy, but now we are focusing on the self-consumption and transactions near demand areas and focus. And here on the map, you can see the future prospect for the transition to distributed energy systems. So currently we have a very simple structure, which is all the energy power establishment is centered on the Seoul and the metropolitan areas, but it will become more complex and distributed across the nation. And also we prepared activation roadmap for the distributed energy systems. And we are now thinking about how we can activate this roadmap and make it work in the market. So if we can renovate the market system and the engineering market, and actually we are working on the related fields. First, we need to make an investment to the infrastructure, not only for the hardware, but also for the software as well. So we need to think about the proper ways to maximize or optimize the software systems that we already have. And lastly, we will pursue regional-led distributed energy system, not centralized one. So with the local authorities and governments and the energy operators and the cooperation with the consumers, we need to renovate and reform the plan. So for details, I will skip it because of the time limit. But actually, I believe that I already gave you the brief introduction that the policies that we already have. So the key points that I like to highlight is that how to accelerate the system infrastructure and minimize the burdens and the boundaries. So in Jeju, renewable energy produced in Jeju can be properly controlled, produced, and monitored and forecasted. And now we are building those structures. And now we're adopting a lot of systems and plans to do so, and we will make an announcement this evening. So actually we have a different pattern with the mainland area. Because the biggest load in the land area is around like 11 and around 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. However, we need a lot of solar power, so the maximum load happens after 4 p.m. Even like 8 a.m. or the 10 a.m. So it has a very different pattern. So we need a DR to adjust the different patterns and also the system to adapt the pattern. And because of that, we need to change the timing of the energy burden and also to reform the price system for the consumers. And for the rest, I will give a simple, brief introduction about the expansion and advancement of infrastructure to improve system stability. I already mentioned that we need a regional-led system. I believe the centralized distribution system will not be proper for Jeju Island. However, by making the local areas to produce and consume their own energies and make them to trade their energy, so we can create a synergy with the local-led, regional-led development plan. So the CAPCO can do their roles, or the third institutions can that role, and we are now considering which institution will be proper to have their roles. So for the market, already has the plan for the reform and the innovations. So our chairperson already mentioned. So we already have this market for more than 20 years. So in order to the renewable energy to be included in the network, we need to think about the, like DSR and the ESS and the other service factors. So we have to make the conditions to induce those systems into the markets. And in order to do so, we have to create the alternative and the other options. So other like supplementary services should be created, and in order to make it work, we have to create the real-time market for the power. And also now we are working on the related renovation plan. So these are the brief introduction of the distributed energy, and we will make an official like announcement about distributed energy later. Also, we will make a plan. We will work on to enactment of the special zone for the distributed energy. Thank you, Director Lee. So Director Lee just had a comment on the distributed energy, including many elements. So also he has touched upon the problems Jeju has while expanding the distributed energy system. And also he made a detailed explanation about the needs of the special act and the policies for that. And on top of that, he reviewed the market conditions and also announced a commitment that the government is working on like preparing plans and policies to make it work. So for this, we need to reform the market and enhancement of the network system. And by establishing that, we can supply energy more stably. And also by doing so, the government can create the sound market system.
님께서
Next, we have Younghee Won, a member of National Assembly from Republic of Korea, and she will going to give a speech about system improvement direction for designation of a special distributed energy zone. Hello, my motto is politics with wind and sun. The energy that we use, if that is coming from the nature and if that can have a surplus, how would that be? And it was very good presentation. Thank you very much. And when I heard about Professor Lee's presentation, it was a very good policy that we should pursue. And I have one question here, and I think it's the journey of finding the answer for this question. And in South Australia, it is all connected, so that is why the distribution network works. But South Australia is like an island, and they still can have 40% and 50% of renewable energy. And I heard the presentation from the Great Britain, and I heard that island has about 40% and 50% of renewable energy, and also Hawaii in the United States, and they plan to have 100% of renewable energy by 2045, and island-like district or zone that can be applied to Korean Peninsula or Jeju Island. And Jeju Island has about 16% of renewable energy, but there are so many curtails, so many output control. So we need to resolve this issue. And when Mr. Lee pointed out the gas industry. And how are we going to invite the gas industry? And this is related to the power market. And about the need, I know that you all know coal-fired generation is producing fine dust, health hazard. Nuclear power generation has concerns of nuclear accident or radioactive contamination. And also transmission line has electromagnetic radiation, environmental degradation. And current costs are passed on to the future, so we always talk about renewable energy. Not in my backyard. We call this NIMBY. People are not welcoming power plants in my backyard. But I think not in anybody's backyard is more correct. If it's not for my backyard, it shouldn't be in anybody's backyard. And this applies to coal-fired power plants also. And in order to make the state community a happy community, we need to think collectively. So we think about sustainable energy and renewable energy and distributed energy. The energy independence in Seoul is about only 3.92%, and Gyeonggi is 60.13%. So how are we going to change this? Nuclear power plants are distributed in very far away area, and gas power plant is in Gyeonggi province, and this is the distribution of renewable energy. If you have power, if you have solar power or wind, you can use this energy. And if we look at Bhutan, if we look at South Australia, we can do it too. And in the US, some of the region has their solar panels, and Korea is the one who is providing those solar panels to the US. And the concept of distributed energy is very similar with Germany. So realizing distributed energy and along with carbon neutral, it is our challenge and it is our work to do. So we need offshore and onshore plant. So basically we have to achieve carbon neutrality. So I pointed out that Jeju Island only has 16% of renewable energy, but they're already experiencing curtails. So I will expect more opinions with expertise later on. And if I can suggest a direction, it has a grid, and this is a gas power plant, 100 megabyte gas plant. There are 4 of them, and there will be 3 more constructed later. And the demand of Jeju is about 600, 700 megawatt. So 100 megawatt is about
그러니까 한 장소에
10 nuclear power plant in Korea. Some of the power plants cannot go off, so some of them are must-run process. So because of this ratio, the ratio of renewable cannot go up. So as you can see in the right side, renewable energy has 0 environment cost. So why do you cut down renewable energy first? Renewable energy should become the basic, and then we add on the other power plants. Then we can target RE 300. We should have a system to realize this. You always say plus DR. This means more demands. Carbon free, renewable energy 100%. Then we need to manage demand and we need to run this efficiently and we need to lower the demand. Lowering demand but increasing supply. That will lead us to carbon neutrality and 100% of renewable energy. This 16%, we should escape from this number. Recently, you said 20% of renewable energy, and your target will go up to 40% and 50%. So how can we achieve that? Simultaneously built renewable energy plant should be managed properly. Then how can we assure this institutionally? That is the power plant market issue, and that is the issue of the electricity bill. Priority grid access and trade to RE. This can be one of the solutions. We need some institutional support. Before 2002, Germany's renewable energy ratio was about 35%, and their percentage of coal fire and nuclear was about 85%. They had increased the target of renewable energy far higher than their original target. So their policy was priority grid access and trade to RE. Because of this process, because of this policy, Germany's renewable energy industry grew significantly, and they achieved their goal. And when there is a curtail fee had not been paid. So I have a question here. Wind power and also renewable energy. When you control 1 kilowatt hour, which one is more expensive? Controlling the wind power, or controlling the other power plant? But now there is no compensation with the cost. So it is very wrong for us to tell the power plant to stop the energy production. And this unfair act are ongoing in Jeju Island. So before this, customers want to use energy, but they didn't have enough energy to use. And I think this can be fixed with the rightful energy bill. And if there is a surplus electricity, this surplus can be saved. So when there is an energy deficit, this can be used as a additional energy. We should not have the same electrical bill. We should not incentivize. We should motivate. We have the cheapest energy in the world, so we cannot incentivize. So the average electricity bill can be very similar, but there should be some differentiation because we need to move customers, we need to move the market. So we need to make sure that everyone can produce and sell electricity. And I think this is very similar to energy bill. When we talk about energy market, there was a privatization issue. It was we need to secure the publicity of this privatization. So I was also opposed to this privatization, but now things have been changed. So in order to achieve carbon neutrality, this small and big producers and suppliers should be possible. I think this accessibility will resolve that. We can save energy, we can sell surplus energy, we can sell saved energy, and that will bring up the demand, and that will bring up the carbon-free island RE 100 and RU 300.
여기서 이제 그 재생에너지를 100%로 가기 위한 회의를 많이 하시는 것 같아요.
I know that you are having meetings to think about the renewable energy 100. And I heard that Governor of Jeju Island said that we are able to make nuclear power plant with the size of a tuna can. If there's a risk, that risk should be managed. But if you make something and if you cannot control the risk, it won't be useful. When we talk about science and technology, we need to choose the right one. I hope we won't be able to need a nuclear power plant with the size of a tuna can. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Miss Yang. Like her motto, she knows about the direction for carbon neutrality, and she was very specific with distributed energy. Thank you very much for your explanation. And we will continue to the third panelist.
So now we're gonna hear the third panelist idea from Kanguk-jo from Korea Power Exchange. So from the presentation was made by Dr. Boyer. We could see a lot of case studies and the government regulations related with the renewable energy. Also, the Professor Hong mentioned about the surplus energy. So for this energy surplus, I was thought about the second coupling as well. So while hearing all those ideas, so I've come up with the idea of the Federal Energy Federation in the U.S. And one mentioned like this, let's face this. So when we plan our electricity network grid, it was not depend on the authorities, but it is actually depending on the environmental authorities. So the energy grid network itself, it is related with the market and the environment as we go into the future. So as Dr. Boyer mentioned and Professor Hong mentioned, the perspective of Korea, we need to think about to make the balance between the market and the regulations. And by doing so, we can achieve the target of our carbon-free state. So I prepared a presentation about the steps that we can make. So the first, we need to develop a scenario for economy-wide decarbonization. And of course, there are a lot of institutions who are working on this. However, scenario itself contains a little unsure and uncertain future technologies, but it can also contains the new technologies, and it will lead the future. So considering all those new technology, we need to develop a new scenario. And some say that carbon neutrality is a state affair, so it should be managed by the government level. But regularly, we need to modify our scenario according to the technological development. And also, when we proceed with the scenario, this model should at least calculate the expected greenhouse gas emissions or the optimal portfolio of available technologies and the estimation of relevant cost. by each economic sector on the basis of more quantitative analysis. We are not talking about the carbon neutrality and the renewable energies. However, we are quite passive to discuss and think about the quantitative analysis, but this quantitative analysis should be strictly specified in this scenario. So the phase 1 was about the economy of the nations. So the phase 2 should consider the limitations that we have. So for the phase 2, we have to develop a scenario for electricity sector decarbonization. So this should be made by the government level. And also this should be updated regularly in like 2 or 3 months periods in order to accept the new technologies. And actually this is duplicated from the previous phase. But before, instead of qualitative analysis, we need to do the quantitative analysis to see and to create the acceptance level of the electricity prices. And the other idea is from the case from the foreign countries, but we don't know what the future technology will be, so we need to consider the uncertainties of the futures. And the phase 3, the regulations are not enough to develop this scenario because we need to propose the future direction for the energy. So at the government level, annually we have to project and present the size of the required facilities like within 10 years or the other like optimal regular basis. And if there's any announcement, we need to also think about the method to secure the resources in a stable way. And actually, one of the economic methods can be the large scale or the small scale energy generations, as we could see from the South Australia cases. So we need to reflect the features that we already have for the large scale project, and for the small scale, it is quite hard to reflect the features of the region. So we need to secure energy and installation nationwide. And now we are dealing with a spot market. So for the spot market, we need to operate in real time. And by doing so, we can infuse the power capability of the operating those renewable energies into the market. So the renewable energy was actually the minor energy source in the past, but in the future, the share of the renewable energy will increase. So in that regard, we have to take the same amount of accountability for the renewable energy that we already have for the existing energies. So we cannot take the position as a free rider for the renewable energy. And actually, this is about the technical sector. We need to secure energy and reserve capacity at the same time. And also, we need to secure the multi-interval for this, not single interval for the resource scheduling and commitment. And also, we had talked about the DR. So the demand response, how the market should react or the response. And there will be a lot of more resources for the zero marginal cost. In that regard, the market price determination should fit with the current situation. As we could see from the South Australia case, well, actually, this is not a all good for all method. However, we need to adjust energy surplus in the market with autonomy. And if renewable energies are quite frequent, the investment will be cut down. But because if we have more renewable energy, the price will go down. And naturally, the other sources can turn into the electricity power. So the energy surplus issue can be mentioned again. Because now I'm working for the Korean Power Exchange, we can achieve the best cost effectiveness for the system operation if we can like utilize the renewable energy and automate the power system operation in real time. And actually, the price of the electricity was kind of taboo to be discussed in Korea. However, we need to improve customer acceptance and their like recognition on this price. This is my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director Joe. Just had an idea about the expansion of the renewable energy in order to achieve the goal of the carbon neutrality and the other related scenarios.
The fourth panelist is Joo-jin Kim. Hello, thank you for inviting me. I am Kim Joo-jin from Climate Solution. Let's take a look at this picture. It's been a long since this had been published, and this is provided by IEA, and IEA had divided the region with 4 different types. One is very poor, developed electrical market, and fourth is very developed electrical market. There are numerous type of the market. IEA is the international organization. After that data had been publicized, there wasn't that much change in Korea. So I know the colors had been changed, but not for Korea. The reason why we have very small level of renewable energy is because the distribution network is very wrong in Korea. If you look at the power sector, we are in a very, I think our power market is like North Korea. And if you look at this market, only one company is dominating the right to produce, right to sell, right to distribute electricity, and that is KEPCO. And with the power generation, 70% of the power generated is from KEPCO. So if the affiliation has a loss or profit, that will be connected to loss or profit of KEPCO. So how the electrical system work or how it will not work, it is controlled by KEPCO. So because of these reasons, I have shown you 4 different types. This first type applies to us. So for us, we are divided into power generation, G, T, D, R, and C. So there are 30% of private industry. So if you look at the map again, these types are very much similar to the types of developing countries. And the second type is G standing alone and TD stays the same. This does not apply to us. Even though it does, it is not that big. You have mentioned Ewol region power plant, and this is very much related to the Ewol plant. I don't know about the gas power plant in Jeju Island, but when I heard about Ewol power plant, it belongs to KEPCO. So if that power plant has a loss, that means KEPCO is also losing. Like Ms. Yang pointed out, we don't know the KEPCO and the Ministry of Industry, they all make decision which comes first, and the regulation from the power exchange. The regulation from those organizations will have the priority. And if you look at the web page, you will find the information. There is a KEPCO related document and also the ministry related document. Maybe there can be the people who are related, financially related to each other. Maybe this can be the reason of curtailment. So in order to resolve this issue, I have pointed out the first type, which is our type, Korea's type. If we don't go up to second, third, and fourth type, innovation will be limited in Korea. If I go back to communication market, if I compare it with communication market, if KT takes up about 70%, and if the KT is the only one who owns the network, and if the KT is the only one that is providing communication service, then what would have happened to IT businesses in Korea? This will be very similar to what it looks like in power market in Korea. Everyone was able to approach the KT business. That is the reason why we are now able to watch Netflix or Watcha. So in that means our power market is very much underdeveloped, and this is limiting the innovation. And in that process, there are also a violation, legal violation, and I think there should be improvement here. Thank you. Thank you very much. CEO Kim Joo-jin said that in order to expand renewable energy ratio, power market should be improved. And he suggested some of the methods. And diversifying is very important. Lastly, we have Mr. Yoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Hyung-sang Yoon, Director General of Future Strategy Bureau of Jeju Special Self-Governing Province. So today, I've heard a keynote presentation as well as the case study of the South Australia and could agree with a lot of elements. Also, Professor Hong had a presentation about the renewable energy sector in the perspective of the surplus, because we do not, if we don't recognize the energy surplus, we don't need a green ecosystem here in Jeju Island. So I agree with that we have to recognize the surplus of energy that we have, and within the frame of the direction we pursue. Now we are working on the legal modification. And for Jeju, we need a desperate legal amendment and enactment for the market and the renewable energy than any other. And also, Representative Yang had just provided a lot of advices and suggestions, and I could agree with much of it. So the production of the renewable energy is still operated within the 8 announcements that we had in the past. So in the process of the transition from light oil to LNG was made because we need a drastic change for the supply and distribution plan of the energy. That's why we changed our energy source to LNG. And that process became the boundary that we can accept the must run of the renewable energy here in Jeju. And I agree with that. So in order to consider and think about those setbacks that we have, I believe that these are related discussions and the bodies is required in the local sectors. And also the local data should be shared properly. So also there's a need for discussion and consideration for this in the local level. Korea Power Exchange as well mentioned that the market-centered energy of supply is the key of the legal enactment, and we agree with that. And also, we do have a specific action plan for our legal enactment with the idea. So we agree with that the parent of Jeju energy consumption is different from the land. So the specific action plans cannot be applied to Jeju if it is made based on the land consumption and the land situation. I hope you can understand and think about this with us. So my presentation will be focused on the achievement of CFI 2030 energy transition policy. However, all the other panelists include these contents and they are well aware of this already. So I believe that we don't need to talk about the progress and achievement that we did for promoting these policies and as well as the limitations as well. And I don't need to talk about the current situations or theoretical ideas of our CFI 2030, but instead of that, I'd like to focus more on the heartwarming advices and ideas that panelists just shared with at this today's session. So I will not use my presentation files at the moment, but instead I like to present my idea that I had generally with the sympathy with the other ideas of the panelists. So last year, as Representative Yang said, the share of the renewable energy in Jeju was 19% based on the PP data of the KEPCO. And as of 11 a.m. today, the share of the renewable energy of Jeju was 25%. So on average for a year it's 19%, but at the time of 11 a.m. it took up about 25%. And you can check the real-time energy share on our website. And today, renewable energy, including solar power and wind power and etc., took up about 25% of the total energy generation. So with that, the share of the renewable energy for Jeju is same as the level of the developed countries. So with that, we will make an example model case as a developed country for the energy supply and the consumption in our energy policies. Thank you very much. Because of the time limit, I would like to ask the audience to I'd like to get a question from the audience from the floor here.
It was a wonderful presentations and discussions, and I have a question about the operator. You have mentioned about distributed electricity and also the democracy, and when you said the decarbonization and carbon neutral, there are some operators, private operators, and the cost of the price of the electricity bought from these operators are very cheap. I heard that it was very cheap. So in this situation, I know that there are some operators who are going through difficulties because of the low price of the produced energy, and I want to know what is the reason of this, and with the private operator, what is their prospect? Either of you can answer the question. Mr. Lee, do you want to answer? With the electricity bill and price, I am also going through difficulties these days, And I am very much concerned also. Like you have said, there can be some misunderstanding that KEPCO is buying out operators' produced energy in a very cheap price. There can be
가서 소비자
misunderstanding. Yes, they are playing the role of buying and selling the produced energy. And is that price really cheap? And how much will it be appropriate to charge the user? So the expense of purchasing expense is going up because of the oil price these days, and we are calculating the expense of the electricity based on the cost. So 100% more or less, this will be the baseline, and there are numerous energy type for use. So we have to diversify the user who are using the electricity and the use. And for the people who, for farmers and for vulnerable class, we provide with less than 100%, but we are also facing difficulties with calculating the right amount of energy price. But the purpose is to vitalize this market. The energy bill system plan will not be appropriate for helping us survive in this market. So maybe if we make, I think we have a possibility of improvement, but in a long-term perspective, electricity bill plan should be considered with numerous factors. So LCV, the competitiveness for renewable energy should be considered, and the day of these energy competing with nuclear power will come someday. And if we get the system, market system, proper for that day, maybe we can realize it.
제가 좀 말씀을 드릴게요. 아마 지금 질문하신 분의 민간
발전 사업자는 재생에너지 발전 사업자.
I will add on. You said you mentioned renewable energy when you mentioned the private operator, and affiliators are from KEPCO, right? I don't think you mentioned the gas corporate. I heard that the facility cost is all assured.
So Korea is one of the country which has the highest cost for the renewable energy, because other countries cost only about like Korean won 10 to 15 Korean won for per kilowatt, and Germany is about like around 600 Korean won, but I heard that it has dropped around like 50 Korean won. So all in all, the nuclear power or the fossil fuel could gain their competitiveness by the economy of scale. And for the renewable energy, we can drop the cost by making more facilities, and also there is no marginal costs. And do we create the market in this scale? If we didn't do that, the cost for the permission is actually expensive. So there are a lot of factors that increase the price of the renewable energy, and the method to reduce that is the roles of the policymakers and related authorities. And also, not only from the market side, this can be done by the government side as well as the local authorities by reducing the necessary conflict factors for including the communication with the local residents. And they can be the driver to reduce the price. And until achieving that price or the target, and until we reduce the price, we need to motivate people to establish renewable energy production facilities. In that case, we need cost. But Korea has a prejudice, like misunderstanding that the cheaper the electricity is, the better it is for us. So that's why we are at this situation to reduce the electricity price. So how can we make breakthrough for this question? So when you look at the structure of the electricity price, we produce electricity power and transmit and provide to the households. That's what consists of the electricity price. But when you look at the countries which has a high electricity power, more than 50%, even up to 70% of the electricity power consists of all the liabilities and the taxes. And that tax and the cost can be reinvented to invested to the power production. But currently, we are now importing a lot of energy sources. Currently, we are spending about 180 trillion Korean won to import energy source from foreign countries. However, actually, renewable energy doesn't have any sources to produce. We have that source in our mainland. So we can do the support for the renewable energy productions. Then we can run our economy properly. So the support for the renewable energy should be made in order to reduce the price. In accordance with the electricity price reduction. So that should be made in that approach. So, but we cannot make approach with the idea that electricity price should be cheap, and it has to be cheap. So we have to change our mind. So actually, we need a social consensus on this matter. But still, if there is a slight increase for the electricity power, it is a very big social issue. So the key point here is how we can make breakthrough for these questions. So because the time limit here, we would like to conclude today's session. So again, I'd like to say thank you for all the participants for today's session. So here, we'd like to conclude the increasing distributed generation to achieve carbon neutrality session. Thank you very much. Again, thank you very much. Please give a big round of applause to all the participants, to the chairperson, speakers, and panelists. Thank you everyone for participation.